Thank you, and I appreciate everybody being here today on a mid-Tuesday afternoon. I know sometimes it can be hard to find the time in our day, so I appreciate you all being here. As said, we are here to talk about sex education and pregnancy prevention in foster and unhoused youth. So I know I gave some information on my background, a little bit more of like the clinical side of my background. I have a master's in education. I've been a board certified behavior analyst since 2018. I am an ASECT certified sexuality educator, and ASECT is the American Association for Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. I'm also a certified behavioral sexologist, level 1 and 2, and I'm a bylaws member on the ASECT bylaws committee. So in this presentation, you guys are going to be able to name and understand common challenges with addressing sex education. We're going to identify strategies that have been proven successful when having difficult conversations and identify potential internal bias with sex education and how to navigate through them. So when we're looking at this, why is it important? Why does this matter? There's a lot of reasons. We could probably spend a whole hour just talking about this slide alone. And there's a lot of data and research on this subject. And so I want to talk about what those findings have come out with. Youth formerly in foster care have a 2 to 14 times the risk of getting an STI and 3 to 4 times the odds of engagement in transactional sex compared with other youth their ages. If you look at an individual who has had a teen pregnancy, youth pregnancy, those adolescent mothers are at risk of increased incidence of depression in young adulthood, lower educational attainment, and less economic success than similar youth, and more likely than older women to experience problems in pregnancy. There's obviously a lot that goes into all of those, but those are some broad strokes on some risk factors that we're looking at. The children of adolescent mothers have a higher risk of infant mortality, may be more likely to experience child maltreatment, have a higher risk of death, and observed to have more behavioral problems and higher rates of educational related difficulties and lower overall life satisfaction, and more likely to engage in risky sexual behaviors themselves when they make it to adolescence time period, teenage time period, all of that. A study that was done in Maryland actually found that birth rates for youth in foster care was almost 3 times the rate of the general population in Maryland, which is pretty astounding when you think about it. 3 times the rate for someone to have essentially a teenage pregnancy when you think about that. A typical aging out of the foster system is 18, so that's before 18. They're 3 times more likely to have a birth, and that's not even pregnancy, that's just birth rates. So that's not counting if there was a miscarriage, that's not counting if there was an abortion. Those are just individuals who gave birth. So that number is honestly probably way higher than the 3 times. And again, that's just a study in Maryland. We'll get into some more data on the next couple slides. But as we can see, this idea of pregnancy prevention and sex education is all encompassing. It encompasses the individual themselves who is having the child, and it is encompassing the children as well, and what they're being born into. And that is not to say anything against foster youth, but there's usually some struggles that are going on there. Might have hard relationships with biological family. They might have trauma experiences. They might be not understanding what healthy relationships look like. So then when that's being modeled for a child, they're more likely to engage in similar behaviors. So looking some more at some data, this is a graph. It's dated. I'm not gonna lie. It's dated information, but I think that it's a good representation as well for the percentages and the numbers. Um, and it was a study completed by Casanueva, Wilson, and Dolan. And they took percentages of forced sex, unforced sex, and one or more pregnancies, and they broke it down by these age groups of 14 to 17 and 18 to 20. And you can see that those numbers are fairly high, especially the glaring one, the 18 to 20 on the one or more pregnancies. So it's really impactful when we're looking at that. And when we're talking about these things, we want to look at what we're, calling risky sexual behavior, early age of sexual initiation, sex with multiple partners, unprotected sex. Those are all things that we're looking at as risky sexual behavior. Um, and getting more into some data, a third of girls aged 18 to 20 had experienced forced sex, so non-consensual sex or coercive sex. Maybe they said okay, but there was some sort of coercion in the transaction, whether it was for money, whether it was for a place to sleep that night, whether it was for food. Even if someone's saying yes, if they're coerced into it, it's still not consensual. 1 in 8 had unforced sex at the age of 13 or younger, and almost half had a pregnancy. These risks are more than double those observed in the general population of teenage girls. And I will say, while there is a lot of studies and focus put on those of someone with a uterus, we're in no way forgetting about the other individual that has to be involved in these activities. But it's been shown that typically the mother takes on the primary responsibility and may have more negative consequences, as shown by the data we discussed on the previous slide. However, it should be noted that another paper by Oshima, Narendorf, and McMillan said that at least 23% of males in the foster system had fathered a child. So again, it's not as much data is put on the father, excuse me, and or anybody with a penis and their rates of having sex. A lot of it is more put on the person who is getting pregnant and potentially birthing a child. Another study showed that among the general population of girls aged 15 to 19 who had sex in the previous 3 months, 16.5% did not use any contraceptive method, but nearly twice as many girls, 32.6% in the foster system, did not use any contraceptive method, which is indicating a huge need for education and support to decrease risky sexual activity among these kids. They're just kids. Kind of to put a little bit more data in. I know we're focusing on that a bit right now, but I think it's important to really see these numbers and understand what we're looking at when we're talking about sex education in the foster system. There Pregnancy rates increased by about 300% between 17 and 19. At 19, 55% of females had been pregnant, and that's kind of indicating that those ages of 17 to 19 is a high risk time frame. 20% of the general population experience a pregnancy by age 19, and over 50% of foster youth experience a pregnancy by that same age of 19. This is indicative of foster youth using birth control ineffectively, inconsistently, or a combination of both. You'll find a lot of reports of um, the thought of using a condom, but that means you need to have one ready every time you're going to, and you need to have a talk with that partner about using one, which can be uncomfortable. And who wants to have an uncomfortable situation or conversation when you're trying to have sex? So it's really easy to skip those things. Um, and delaying childbearing by 3 or 4 years, for example, from age 17 to 20 or 21, which is still fairly young, can reduce 50% the chances that a child born to a youth in foster care will also end up in the foster care system. So again, we're looking at that systemic breakdown and kind of that generational breakdown as well of how can we prevent some of these generational things of someone being in the foster system and then their child also being in the foster system. So what are the youth saying, right? What are they saying about sex education and how to prevent pregnancy? Pretty simple slide, but the truth is they're asking for pretty simple things. They want frank and honest conversations. They want support and honesty while still being respectful. I acknowledge that this can be easier said than done. Many of us were not raised with open and honest communication surrounding sex or sex education. So it can be really uncomfortable for us to tackle these topics. But all we have to do is try. And one thing that can heavily get in our way is internal bias. We're going to talk about that for a minute. So what is internal bias? It refers to unconscious attitudes and stereotypes that affect understanding, decisions, and actions. They're essentially mental shortcuts to process a large amount of information, often leading to assumptions about people, situations, or ideas. While it's not always negative, bias can help make quick judgments and navigate the world. However, if it's left unchecked, internal bias can have detrimental effects on individuals and society. So, there's a couple different types of bias that we see in the world. We have confirmation bias, and this is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. Affinity bias, the tendency to favor people who are similar, whether due to shared interests, backgrounds, or experiences. Attribution bias, it's the cause of attributing the cause of others' behavior to their internal characteristics while attributing our own behavior to external factors. Conformity bias, the tendency to adjust thoughts, feelings, or behaviors to align with those of a group, and stereotyping, overgeneralizing about a particular group of people. So the impacts of this is our decision making. It can distort our thinking, it can cloud our judgment, it can lead us to making really flawed decisions. It can shape how others are perceived and interacted with relationships and just others we see in the community. And it can potentially lead to discriminatory behavior. There's also some workplace dynamics that can be brought into bias. I'm not going to get into that one since we're not talking about workplace dynamics today, but wanted to note that it can be an impacted area in case, trying to work on internal bias. That is another area that can be looked at. Furthermore, in the subject we are looking at, bias can look like not supporting a queer identity, not supporting somebody's religious or cultural observations. Quite possibly the bias can be over someone wanting to have sex in general, testing positive for an STI, or the options if someone's pregnant, if they want to keep the pregnancy, if they want to terminate the pregnancy, getting on birth control. All these topics can be really divisive in the world of sex education and just parenting and relationships, caregiving, all of that in general. So how can we work towards overcoming bias? takes dedication, it takes work, it takes a commitment. We want to be able to self-reflect. Let's examine our beliefs and our assumptions. What are our gut reactions to different situations and people, and really take time to look at that and see if they're rooted in some kind of those bias that we went over and how we can address that. Education and exposure, coming to talks, learning about different cultures and perspectives and experiences, learning who's in your community, who's outside of this circle that we run in, what else is out there in the world. We want to challenge our assumptions. So again, what are our initial reactions and interpretations of something, especially when we're looking at others' behavior or their performance? If it's different than ours, are we really judgmental? Whether we mean to be or not, that might be the gut reaction. And then we need to examine, okay, was that my first thought to be judgmental? What do I need to work on? We want to seek feedback. Ask trusted individuals for honest feedback on interactions and decision making. And again, going outside of your circle for that too. If we're only going to those that look like us, talk like us, hang in the same spaces, well, yeah, our feedback's going to be great, probably, right? Going outside of that and into a different space and asking for feedback is really important on getting true feedback that you can use to help overcome any bias. We also want to practice mindfulness and perspective taking. We want to practice techniques like mindfulness, mindful moments, to recognize bias and biased thoughts before acting on them, and trying to understand situations from other people's perspectives really gives us time to, again, we use the word examine a lot, really examine where our brain is at, where our gut reactions are at, and where maybe we can make some positive changes. Okay. So let's talk about strategies now, right? We talked about kind of some precursor things that we might need to know. And let's get into some strategies. First and foremost, it's okay that we don't know things, and it's okay to admit that. I will go out on a ledge to say that that is a great thing to be able to do, is to admit that we don't know something. Earlier we talked about how we as adults might not have had the best sex education. Research shows we most likely did not, which means it's also likely we don't have all the answers. And it's okay to tell these kids that we don't know and ask them if we can return after looking something up. Or better yet, can we research it together? Not only does this create trust and show you're dedicated to helping them, gives you an opportunity to give examples of places to look for accurate information and not just trusting that everything on the internet is true. So you're teaching a lot of skills with that if you're able to look at sites together, look at books together, watch videos together. And let's be real, at least in my life, they know more than me in terms of lingo and other things like that. Let them educate you. Learn from them as much as they're learning from you. Because remember, if you aren't teaching them, they're going to get answers from somewhere. Whether that's from peers, whether that's online, pornography, a random stranger who offers to teach them everything they need to know about sex, right? There's a risk to not getting accurate or realistic information from people that we trust. It can lead to so many risky behaviors, potentially sexual coercion, non-consensual acts. We're just really leaving the door open for that instead of pushing through our uncomfortableness and taking a front seat approach and educating. Something else to consider is if we're modeling these behaviors in our own home, if we're talking about consent, are we modeling consent? Are we knocking on the door and waiting for an answer before we go in a room? Are we not eavesdropping in on conversations? Are we respecting privacy? Are we forcing them to hug and kiss people that they don't want to? All of those can be violations of their consent and not showing good models of consent at the same time. And I understand that can be hard. However, we want to practice what we preach, right? We don't want to sit here and talk about them respecting boundaries and things if we're not doing the same thing for them or for other people in the home. One of the most important things we can do is to make our approach individualized. If you have multiple kids in the home, what works for one child might not work for another. It's really important to take in that individualization into account. We also want to talk about cultural considerations and queer identities. Is the individual in the home from a different cultural background? Are there things that they might need to be aware of, even if they choose not to work within those cultural norms for their community, they should still be aware of it. Or if they're if they have a queer identity, do you understand some of the nuances in queer culture and what lingo there is, what events there are, things like that, making sure that you're doing that. And to build on that, even if the child hasn't voiced identifying one way or another, it's important they have the knowledge to make informed decisions about their sexual choices and options. And then on the other hand, if you know that this individual identifies as gay, that doesn't mean you don't teach about pregnancy prevention, right? That doesn't, just because they identify as gay doesn't mean they might not have a risk of either getting pregnant or getting someone pregnant down the line. And this can also go for teaching people with a penis about vaginas, vulvas, menstruation, and pregnancy, just as teaching any gender about ejaculating, wet dreams, and spontaneous erections. This also goes for what we count as sex, right? Are we only talking about penis and vagina sex? Are we talking about oral? Are we talking about anal? Both of these are options for someone who doesn't identify as gay and is in a hetero coupling, not just for queer individuals. Inclusivity is vital and knowledge is vital, and having the knowledge of what our peers are going through can also help us be kinder and more understanding humans in general. We also want to utilize our village and community, and it's a very underutilized tool. If our individual is identifying as queer or as a different racial makeup than you, are we utilizing a community that understands their perspective? There are special considerations for different communities. A Caucasian caregiver might not understand not wanting to go to the doctor in the Black and Brown community. We might want to look into support groups in the divisive political climate. Does a straight caregiver understand why a queer individual might not feel safe going in the community or asking a doctor for help, or what are their options if they're exploring their gender identity and sexuality and things like that. There's a lot to understand and take into consideration when we're looking at these. Community groups is a great resource to look into, be involved in, ask for assistance with navigating challenging topics and situations. This is in no way me saying that all education should be defaulted to somebody else. It's saying that the phrase, "it takes a village," is there for a reason. We should be okay with asking for help, especially when it comes to cultural differences that we just might not have the right information for. Furthermore, if we're looking at a child who has a disability of some kind, again, that individualization is really, really important. We might need to slow things down and teach to their needs. How does the individual take in information? Do we need to find more visuals versus a back and forth conversation? Do we need social stories? Do we need to use TV show clips, movie clips, some other visual support? Individuals with disabilities are more likely to be sexually abused than their neurotypical peers. And while this is for a multitude of reasons, one is attributed to not being given the same education as some of their peers in regard to sexuality. So sometimes we need to start with body cues and then maybe we build up to more difficult topics such as flirting and contraception, but really trying to look at where is their knowledge and where do we need to start and um how do we get there? And on the previous slide we touched on consent and it being modeled in the home, and this is even more paramount with our individuals with disabilities. Adults tend to do a lot of physical help with disabled children, some of the time out of need, other times out of good intentions, but it can inadvertently teach bad skills. For example, if they need help with toileting or showering, who is helping or in the bathroom when that's going on? Is there any way to fade that back to help teach that people should not be seeing them shower or be naked or using the toilet? Are we Can we put up visuals instead of doing full physical prompting? Can we stand in the doorway and yell in some vocal prompts instead of standing there with the shower curtain open and watching them take their shower? Where can we back off some of that to help teach some of these safety skills? In addition, where are they getting dressed? Is it private? Is it in the living room? Is it out in the hallway? Are they walking around after the shower holding their clothes but coming out of the bathroom? We really want to back up those boundary and consent skills in the home so that can generalize and carry over to other settings. Like we've said, knowledge is power. So why would we actively choose not to give it to someone? We should be wanting to give people power and knowledge in their life. Excuse me. And this is a great way to start doing it. Okay, so if we're looking at other direct strategies, I really wanted to um, talk about birth control. I know that each topic that we've talked about already could have its own slide, probably own presentation. I felt like birth control was one that should have a little bit more focus. And although things are starting to shift a bit, many doctors do not explain all the types of birth control, their effectiveness, their risks, and other important information, especially to someone they're perceiving as a child or may even legally still be a child. It's important for caregivers then to understand the types of birth control so they can talk with their youth and help them make informed decision. Is the youth prone to forgetting? Maybe daily pills are not the best option then. So what's their choice? Do they have hormone sensitivities? Maybe they should be asking about low hormone options. What if for some reason they can't take any birth control? Just doesn't work with their body system. Maybe they're allergic to something. Maybe their hormones are already out of whack and are under the care, and an endocrinologist says that it's not the right time for that. How do we make sure they understand the need for condoms and what cycle tracking could look like if they want to be sexually active? If we're looking at um, what may be taught in school and what a lot of caregivers may have been taught growing up, most of the time abstinence was the only option. And while it's a great option, should not be the only one discussed, as we know youth can think they'll be abstinence and then hormones will hormone and bam, they have now had sex. Um, So keeping this information is really, really important in looking at effectiveness and what is the daily use, if any, what is good, what is bad, all of those things for the individual is is really, really important, and really examining that bias at the same time of, I don't think that a 15-year-old should be on birth control, but yet your 15-year-old's asking. There might be a reason they're asking. Maybe they're trying to make a safe and informed decision by getting on birth control because they know that they want to have sex, right? Like there's might be some things that we can't prevent, but we can put in some factors that'll mitigate the risk, and that's important to look at it that way. Um, Looking at STIs, besides abstinence, one of the only forms of prevention for STIs is condoms. Not only do people need to understand the pill or the shot or the IUD, they need to be talked about the importance of using a condom along with these options. In addition, talking to someone who does not have a penis about why it's important for them to carry condoms and to be comfortable with advocating to use a condom and knowing how to put one on and what that looks like is another way to prevent potential assault, pregnancy, contracting an STI, all of those things. It should not just be one person's responsibility. Pregnancy prevention, STI prevention, that is a dual responsibility. It does not fall on one person. Um, there is also a pill called PrEP or PEP that can be taken either before having sex, that's what PrEP is, pre-exposure, or after post-exposure, that can be taken to minimize the risk of contracting HIV. But a condom is still best practice if someone is sexually active to be using, and to preventing pregnancy and STIs. And as we touched on earlier, even if there is no risk of pregnancy because it's a same-sex coupling, STIs are still possible, and an opposite sex encounter could happen consensually or non-consensually. So again, we need to be giving all of these options, all of these choices. Really want to make sure that there is no shame, blame, or guilt thrown into any of this as well, because then they're not going to come to us. If we take all of these things that we've talked about, all of these skills, all of these strategies, if we're putting in shame with them, if we're putting in guilt, or even a poor form of not understanding, why are they going to come back to us? Right? They're being made to feel silly or embarrassed for these feelings they might not be able to control, or these actions that they didn't think they were going to do, or maybe they knew they were going to do it, but now they're made to feel guilty about it. That can be just as risky as any of these other behaviors, because then again, who are they going to go to for education? Who are they going to go to for help? What if someone does get pregnant? Are they going to go to the person who shamed them? Probably not, unless it's a last resort. So we want to make sure that all of these questions, conversations are all happening without that shame and guilt, which, if we're examining our internal bias, then it's more likely that we're going to be keeping those things out because we are trying to make sure we're not reacting with bias and looking at all of our choices and what's going on. Does anyone have any questions about what we've talked about so far? Okay, go on to another slide. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was resources that can be used to help with these conversations. Sex Positive Talks to Have with Kids is a really, really amazing book and resource. I can't say enough positive praise for it. It breaks down different topics to talk about with different age groups. So that's the really nice part, is it'll take a topic such as consent, and then you'll have like a 0 to 5 age group, and then like a 5 to 8, and then it goes up from there, right? So it breaks down the concepts into age appropriate topics. So it's not skipping anything. It's just, right, when we're talking with a 3-year-old about consent, we're not going to be talking about sex. We're going to be talking about don't take the toy from Jimmy. He really likes his trucks and his dolls that go in the trucks, and you can't just take them. We're not going to be bursting in the bathroom door when someone's using the potty, right? We're going to talk about consent in the world of a 3-year-old. And then as we get older, oh, hey, don't touch people's bodies without asking. We don't do that. Oh, hey, don't go looking through people's phones, or I don't know if people keep diaries anymore. Ages me a little bit. Diaries, things like that, right? Like we're talking about a little bit more deeper privacy. And then we start talking about sex and sexual acts and consent with that. So it does a really, really great job of identifying these topics and then breaking it down. And it gives scripts that you can use. It gives different resources. It's a really, really wonderful book. Um, like I said, that can be used across a lifespan. And that's one too, that if you're having um, a new foster placement and they're coming in and they're 13 or something and they're not young, you can look at something like that and being like, okay, do we think they have these foundational skills? Or do we maybe need to start with some of those and work up to where they're at age appropriate levels for a 13-year-old, 15-year-old, 10-year-old, whatever it may be. So this would give a really good one with that foundational knowledge. Consent for Kids is another really good one. Um, Talking about boundaries, respect. Again, it's not talking about sexual acts. I feel like a lot of times we tend to sexualize the word consent, but consent is active in every aspect of our life. Um, Consent to this being recorded. There's consent to someone borrowing your pen or notebook or a high five or things like that. It's not just with sexual acts. So that Consent for Kids book is really great in talking about those foundational skills of, hey, someone's in my body bubble and I would like them to leave and to get out. How do you say that? What do you say? And really just letting them know they're allowed to say that. You don't have to let someone in your space. You don't have to kiss great Aunt Susie goodbye. You can give her a fist bump and that's okay. Right? So that's a really good one. There's also if you put into Google, or not Google, YouTube, consent for kids, there's a good little couple-minute video clip that goes along with similar things. So if your learner, like I said, would rather have a video clip versus a book, that might be a good option in using that as well. The two other books up there, Sex is a Funny Word, and then You Know Sex, and there is a third one in there. The title has left my brain right now, but the author and the illustrator, it's a great set of books. It's set up more like a comic, which can be really good, like a graphic novel. It just goes through basics and how to have conversations, and just puts it in a really just what I would say is like teen friendly way. Like I said, it's not just a textbook they're reading through. It's really meant to be for for people who are going through these things and need to know them, like I said, as foundational skills, as life skills. Able to Learn is a great website if you have a learner with a disability or might need some more visual supports. They have social stories, they have task analysis, all kinds of things. Anything I've ever tried to get from there has been free. I don't even know if I've seen anything that you have to pay for. But they have a lot of information, a lot of graphics that you can use. That's a great website if you if we need to individualize for someone who needs some more visual supports. Scarleteen is another great website that can be used for some more education, especially on the queer identity side. But also, I think for anybody, it's a great site to check out for videos, for blog posts, for all kinds of information. It's really great.